It's funny how life can throw you curveballs when you least expect them. I always thought I had everything figured out. Steady job, a nice house, and a wife who, up until recently, I believed was my soulmate. Her name's Amanda, and we've been married for 8 years. No kids, though that was a deliberate choice. We wanted to enjoy each other's company, travel the world, and build a life that was ours and ours alone. Amanda was the kind of woman who could light up a room. Her laughter was infectious, and she had this way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world. She was beautiful too. Long brown hair, a smile that could stop traffic, and a body that made heads turn wherever we went. But what really got me was her mind. Amanda was sharp, witty, and always one step ahead, which is probably why it took me so damn long to realize something was wrong. Looking back, I guess the signs were there. We used to talk about everything, from our dreams to the mundane details of our day. But lately, those conversations had started to dwindle. I chalked it up to the stress of work. She'd been pulling long hours at the office, climbing the corporate ladder with the kind of ambition that I admired and supported. Hell, I was proud of her. I didn't mind when she had to stay late or when she was too tired to spend time together. I thought I was being a good husband, giving her space to grow, to pursue her career. I never imagined that space would be filled with someone else. The first time I really felt something was off was about a month ago. It was subtle. Amanda seemed more distant. Her smile didn't reach her eyes like it used to, and she was always on her phone more than usual. But when I asked her about it, she brushed me off, saying she was just tired or stressed out from work. I didn't push. Why would I? We all have our rough patches, right? Then came the late nights. Amanda started coming home later and later, claiming she had meetings that ran over or last-minute projects that needed her attention. I believed her. I mean, why wouldn't I? We've always had a strong relationship, built on trust. But even that trust started to feel shaky when I noticed she'd get defensive whenever I asked her about work. It was like she was hiding something. But every time I tried to bring it up, she'd shut me down with a quick peck on the cheek and a promise that everything was fine. I wish I could say there was one glaring red flag that tipped me off, but it wasn't like that. It was more like a series of small, almost insignificant things that added up over time. A lingering scent on her clothes that wasn't hers, texts that she quickly swiped away when I walked into the room, and an overall feeling that I was living with a stranger. But I didn't want to be that guy. The paranoid husband who questions everything his wife does. So I ignored it. Or at least, I tried to. The final straw, though, came last weekend. We were supposed to have a quiet night in, just the two of us. I had planned everything. Cooked her favorite meal, got a bottle of wine, and even picked out a movie I knew she'd love. But when she got home, she was different. She seemed disconnected, like she was physically there, but her mind was somewhere else. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just another bad day at work. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. As the night went on, I noticed she was checking her phone more than usual. And then, during dinner, she got a text. She glanced at it, her face lit up with an excitement I hadn't seen in a long time, and she quickly put her phone away. That's when I knew. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. Something was happening behind my back. Something that wasn't just work or stress. I didn't say anything that night. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, how to handle this new reality that was crashing down around me. So I waited. I played the role of the loving husband, but inside, I was dying. And that's where we are now, on the edge of something I never thought I'd have to face. Betrayal. This is just the beginning. The calm before the storm. I have a feeling that things are about to get much, much worse. The truth has a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it, like a shadow that grows longer and darker until it swallows you whole. That's how it felt when I finally uncovered what Amanda had been hiding. And trust me, I wish I hadn't. It was the following week, after that disastrous dinner, when my suspicions reached a boiling point. Amanda had started acting even more erratically. She was either too cheerful, like she was forcing it, or distant, lost in her thoughts. The warmth that had once defined our relationship was gone, replaced by a coldness that I couldn't shake off. And the phone. God, the phone. It was like it had become an extension of her hand. She never let it out of her sight. I knew something was up, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. One night, after she'd gone to bed, leaving her phone charging on the nightstand, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I waited until her breathing was steady, the telltale sign that she was asleep, and then I reached for her phone. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I felt sick to my stomach, knowing that what I was about to do would change everything. But I had to know. I had to know if the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, was betraying me. She had a passcode, of course, but we'd always shared them with each other. Trust, right? I punched in the numbers and the screen lit up. Her messages were the first thing I checked. I scrolled through them, and at first it was all mundane stuff. Work-related chats, texts from friends, a few from her mom. I was about to breathe a sigh of relief when I noticed a thread from someone named Alex. No last name, just Alex. My heart started pounding. I didn't know any Alex in her life, at least not one that she texted this frequently. The messages were mostly short, nothing incriminating at first glance, but there was a tone to them, a familiarity that didn't sit right with me. Then I found it, a message buried a few days back, something that made my blood run cold. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. Last night, my mind raced as I tried to remember what she had told me about that night. A work event. She said she had a late meeting and would be home around midnight. I had believed her. Why wouldn't I? But now, with this message staring back at me, it all clicked into place. The late nights, the secrecy, the sudden change in her behavior. It was all because of him. I scrolled further, my stomach churning as I read the back and forths between them. There were jokes, inside references that I didn't understand, and plans to meet up again. But it was the pictures that really did me in. Amanda, the woman I had shared my life with, sending selfies to this guy. Pictures that were meant for me, not for some other man. They weren't explicit, but they were intimate in a way that made me want to throw the phone across the room. I should have stopped there. I should have put the phone down and walked away, but I couldn't. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went, how long it had been happening. So, I checked her emails next. Most of it was work-related, just like her messages. But then I found a reservation for a hotel room, booked under a fake name. The date matched one of the nights she had told me she was working late. My world was spinning. This wasn't just a fling. It wasn't just some harmless flirtation. This was a full-blown affair, complete with hotel rooms and God knows what else. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the dark, staring at the wall, replaying every moment from the past few months, trying to figure out how I had missed this. How could I have been so blind? But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the truth was there, clear as day. My wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, was cheating on me. The next day, I was a zombie, going through the motions at work, my mind completely elsewhere. I couldn't look at Amanda when I got home that evening. She asked me if I was okay, even placed her hand on my arm like she used to when we first started dating, but I pulled away. I couldn't stand her touch, knowing what she had been doing behind my back. She noticed, of course. How could she not? But she didn't press. She just sighed and went to bed early, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew I had to confront her, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to face the reality of what this would mean for us. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The truth was out, and there was no going back. So I started planning. If she thought she could fool me, she was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't going to play the victim in this story. If she wanted to throw away our life together for some guy named Alex, then she was going to pay for it. I just needed to figure out the best way to expose her lies and make her feel the same pain she'd inflicted on me. But first, I had to gather more evidence, something undeniable that she couldn't talk her way out of. And I knew just how to do it. I had access to her emails, her phone. Hell, I even had access to our home's security cameras. I was going to use every tool at my disposal to catch her in the act. If she was stupid enough to keep lying to me, she'd soon find out just how big of a mistake that was. The storm was coming, and I was ready to unleash it. The days leading up to the confrontation were hell. Every moment I spent in the same room as Amanda felt like a lie. She continued to play her part, smiling, laughing, acting like the perfect wife, while I seethed underneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to drop the hammer. I could barely look at her without feeling disgusted, knowing what she had been doing behind my back. But I needed to keep it together, at least until I had all the evidence I needed. I started digging deeper into her life. It wasn't hard. I knew all her passwords, had access to her work emails, her social media accounts, everything. The more I uncovered, the more enraged I became. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. There were messages from Alex almost every day, plans to meet up when I was at work, or on weekends when she said she had errands to run. The hotel reservations were frequent, and each time she had some excuse ready for me, some work-related event or meeting that conveniently kept her out late. One night, after another of her so-called work events, she came home smelling like a mix of expensive cologne and sweat. She tried to kiss me, but I turned my head, pretending to be too engrossed in a book to notice her. She didn't push it, just shrugged and went to bed, leaving me alone in the living room with my thoughts. That was the night I decided enough was enough. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine while she was screwing around behind my back. I was done playing the fool. It was time to confront her and lay everything out in the open. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Amanda didn't seem to notice, too busy with whatever it was she was doing on her phone to care. I told her I wasn't feeling well and was going to spend the day at home resting. She barely glanced up, just nodded, and said she'd check in on me later. I watched her leave, and as soon as the door closed behind her, I sprang into action. First, I accessed the security cameras. We had a few set up around the house, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and another in the hallway leading to the bedroom. I had set them up a couple of years ago for security purposes, never imagining I'd be using them to catch my wife in an affair. I reviewed the footage, focusing on the nights she had claimed to be working late. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There she was, sneaking into the house in the early hours of the morning, looking disheveled and satisfied, her clothes wrinkled, her hair a mess. In the kitchen, she'd pour herself a glass of water, lean against the counter and check her phone, no doubt texting her lover to let him know she made it home safely. The sight of it made my blood boil, but I forced myself to keep watching. I needed more, something undeniable that she couldn't explain away with another lie. It didn't take long to find it. On one of the more recent nights, after she returned home, she didn't go straight to bed. Instead, she sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her face lit up with that same excitement I had seen at dinner. She was texting him, laughing softly at whatever he had sent her. Then she did something that nearly sent me over the edge. She took a selfie, one of those flirty bedroom-eyed ones, and sent it to him. I watched as she typed out a message, probably something sickeningly sweet or suggestive, and hit send. I couldn't take it anymore. I had all the proof I needed. It was time to end this charade. That evening, I made sure everything was in place. I transferred all the footage and messages to a secure folder on my computer, where she couldn't delete or tamper with it. Then I waited. Amanda came home at her usual time, all smiles and cheer, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. We had dinner together, just like any other night, but I barely touched my food. My mind was too focused on what was about to go down. After dinner, she went to take a shower, and I followed her into the bathroom. She was just stepping out of the shower, wrapping a towel around her body, when she saw me standing there, leaning against the doorframe. "Hey," she said, surprised but smiling. "What's up?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, taking in the sight of the woman who had betrayed me so thoroughly, who had lied to my face every day for months, maybe even years. Finally, I spoke, my voice cold and steady. "How was your day, Amanda?" I asked, my eyes never leaving hers. She blinked, a bit taken aback by my tone. It was fine. Busy, you know how it is." "Busy, huh?" I said, pushing off the doorframe and taking a step closer to her. "Busy with work, or busy fucking Alex?" The color drained from her face in an instant. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no words came out. For the first time in a long time, she was speechless. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping even closer until there was barely any space between us. "Cat got your tongue? Or is it that you don't know which lie to tell me first?" What are you talking about?" she finally stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't play dumb with me, Amanda. I snarled, my patience finally snapping. I know everything. I've seen the texts, the pictures, the hotel reservations. I've seen the security footage of you sneaking back into the house after you've been with him. I know you've been cheating on me, and I'm done pretending that I don't. She was trembling now, her eyes darting around the room like she was looking for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. She was cornered, and she knew it. I can explain, she finally managed to say, her voice shaky and weak. Explain? I barked out a bitter laugh. Go ahead, Amanda. Explain to me how you've been lying to my face for months, how you've been screwing some other guy behind my back, how you've made a complete fool out of me. Go ahead, I'm listening. She choked on her words, tears welling up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. I never meant for it to happen, okay? It just did. Oh, it just happened, did it? I spat, my anger boiling over. You just happened to start texting this guy. Just happened to book hotel rooms with him. Just happened to fuck him while I was sitting at home like a goddamn idiot, thinking you were working late. Is that what you're telling me? She didn't answer, just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling as she clutched the towel around her. Why, Amanda? I asked, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Why did you do this to me? To us? She shook her head, sobbing now. I don't know. I just needed something different. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. Sorry? I sneered. You think sorry is going to fix this? You think sorry is going to make up for all the lies, all the betrayal? You think sorry is going to erase the fact that you've been cheating on me? I didn't mean to hurt you, she cried, reaching out to touch me, but I recoiled like she was poison. Don't touch me, I snapped, my voice ice cold. You don't get to touch me. Not after what you've done. She crumpled at that, collapsing onto the bathroom floor, her sobs echoing off the tiled walls. But I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for her. All I felt was rage, a burning, all-consuming rage that threatened to tear me apart from the inside out. I trusted you, I whispered, my voice shaking with the effort it took to keep it under control. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. By screwing some other guy? By lying to me day in and day out? I'm sorry, she sobbed again. But the words were empty, meaningless. I don't care how sorry you are, I said, my voice cold as steel. I'm done with you, Amanda. We're done. With that, I turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving her there on the floor, broken and sobbing. But I didn't feel any satisfaction, no sense of victory. All I felt was the crushing weight of betrayal, and the knowledge that my life would never be the same again. Walking away from that confrontation was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to break something, to make Amanda feel the same level of pain she had inflicted on me. But I didn't. I forced myself to stay calm, to think rationally. If she thought her tears and pathetic apologies were going to be enough to win me over, she was dead wrong. In the days that followed, Amanda tried her best to make amends. She cooked my favorite meals, cleaned the house meticulously, and even attempted to initiate sex more than once. But every time she tried to get close to me, I'd turn away, repulsed by the very sight of her. I wasn't ready to forgive, not by a long shot. If anything, her pathetic attempts at reconciliation only fueled my anger. I started plotting my revenge. I didn't want her just to hurt. I wanted her to suffer, to experience the same crushing weight of betrayal that I was enduring. But I knew I had to be smart about it. Amanda was too clever to fall for anything obvious. No, I had to hit her where it would hurt the most: her pride, her reputation, and most importantly, her sense of control. I began by playing along with her charade of trying to make things right. I pretended to soften, letting her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could earn my forgiveness. I complimented her on her cooking, thanked her for the small gestures, and even allowed her to touch me again, though I cringed internally every time. It was all part of the plan. The more she thought she was winning me back, the more devastating the fall would be when I pulled the rug out from under her. I knew I couldn't keep this act up forever, so I needed to strike when she least expected it. That's when I came up with the idea of a surprise trip. Amanda had always loved surprises, and I knew she'd jump at the chance to go away for a weekend. especially if she thought it was my way of showing her that I was willing to work things out. I pitched the idea to her one evening, casually mentioning that we hadn't had any time to ourselves lately, and that maybe a weekend getaway would do us some good. Her eyes lit up at the suggestion, and I could see the hope flicker in her expression. She agreed immediately, and within days, we had plans to drive out to a secluded cabin in the mountains, a place where we could be alone, away from the distractions of everyday life. She was thrilled, buzzing with excitement, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed genuinely happy. Little did she know that happiness was about to be shattered. The day of the trip arrived, and we packed up the car early in the morning. Amanda was all smiles, chatting away about how nice it would be to spend some quality time together. I nodded along, pretending to share her enthusiasm, but inside I was cold, calculating every move. The drive to the cabin was scenic, the mountains looming in the distance, their peaks capped with snow. Amanda kept reaching over to touch my hand, her gestures affectionate, desperate for a connection that I had no intention of giving her. When we finally arrived at the cabin, I made a show of setting everything up. I lit a fire in the hearth, uncorked a bottle of wine, and even played some of her favorite music in the background. It was the perfect romantic setting, designed to lull her into a false sense of security. We had dinner together, and I watched as she slowly let her guard down, the tension she'd been carrying for weeks melting away with each sip of wine. After dinner, we sat by the fire, the warmth from the flames casting a soft glow across the room. Amanda leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of guilt. Almost. But then I remembered the texts, the hotel rooms, the lies, and any trace of pity evaporated. "You know," she said softly, breaking the silence, "I'm really glad we did this. It feels good to be close to you again." I smiled down at her, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm glad too," I said, my voice deceptively calm. "It's been too long since we've had time to ourselves." She looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with what I could only assume was hope. "Maybe we can start over," she whispered. "Leave everything behind us and just focus on us." I leaned down, brushing my lips against her forehead, and whispered back, "Maybe we can." She smiled then, a real smile, one that made my stomach turn. But I kept up the act, letting her believe that everything was going to be okay. We spent the rest of the evening talking, reminiscing about the early days of our relationship, the trips we'd taken, the memories we'd made. It was almost too easy to lure her into this false sense of security. When it was finally time for bed, I excused myself to get something from the car. She offered to come with me, but I told her to stay, that I wouldn't be long. She agreed, and I could see the relief in her eyes. Relief that maybe, just maybe, she had managed to salvage what she had so carelessly thrown away. But I wasn't going to the car to get something. I was going to retrieve the final piece of my plan, a small, inconspicuous item that would set everything in motion. I walked out to the car, opened the trunk, and there it was, a bottle of colorless, odorless liquid that I had ordered online. It wasn't anything deadly, nothing that would cause permanent harm, but it was potent enough to make her sick, to incapacitate her for just long enough. I poured a small amount of the liquid into a glass of water, swirled it around until it was completely dissolved, and then headed back inside. Amanda was already in bed when I returned, her eyes closed, a soft smile playing on her lips. I set the glass down on the nightstand next to her, then climbed into bed beside her, pulling the covers up. "I got you some water," I said, my voice gentle. "Thought you might be thirsty after all that wine." She opened her eyes, looking at me with a mix of gratitude and something else. Something that made me want to recoil. "Thank you," she murmured, reaching for the glass. She drank it down in a few gulps, then set it back down, her eyes already growing heavy. I watched as she drifted off to sleep, the effects of the liquid taking hold faster than I expected. Within minutes, she was out cold, her breathing slow and steady. I waited a little longer, just to be sure, and when I was confident that she wouldn't wake up, I got out of bed. I had already planned everything down to the smallest detail. The cabin was remote, no neighbors for miles, and the nearest town was at least an hour's drive away. There was no cell service, no internet, just the two of us, alone in the middle of nowhere. The perfect place to teach her a lesson she would never forget. I started with her phone, the very device she had used to betray me. I scrolled through her contacts, her messages, her photos, deleting everything that connected her to Alex. It was cathartic, erasing every trace of their affair, as if I could somehow wipe away the pain she had caused. Once I was done, I turned off the phone and tossed it into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed it. Next, I went to the kitchen and retrieved the things I had brought with me, a set of restraints, a blindfold, and a few other items that I knew would make the night memorable for Amanda in all the wrong ways. I carried them back to the bedroom, my heart pounding in anticipation, and set everything up. She didn't stir as I secured her wrists and ankles to the bedposts, didn't even flinch when I tightened the restraints. I slipped the blindfold over her eyes, making sure it was snug, and then stepped back to admire my work. There she was, completely at my mercy, just as I had been at hers for so many months. I sat down in the chair next to the bed and waited. It didn't take long for her to start waking up, her body shifting as she slowly regained consciousness. I watched as she tugged at the restraints, confusion clouding her features as she realized she couldn't move. She tried to open her eyes, but the blindfold kept her in the dark, heightening her sense of helplessness. "What the?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "What's going on?" I didn't answer right away, just sat there, watching her struggle, letting the fear build. Finally, when she started to panic, I leaned forward and spoke, my voice low and menacing. "Welcome back, Amanda." She froze at the sound of my voice, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to piece together what was happening. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just giving you a taste of your own medicine," I replied, standing up and walking around the bed so she could feel my presence. She tugged harder at the restraints, her breathing quickening as the reality of her situation set in. "Jake, please. What's going on? Why am I tied up?" I leaned in close, my lips brushing against her ear as I whispered, "Because it's time you learned what it feels like to be helpless, Amanda. To have no control, no power, no choice." She whimpered, pulling at the restraints with renewed desperation. "Please, Jake, let me go. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't good enough," I snarled, pulling back and looking down at her with cold, calculating eyes. "You think you can just cry and apologize and everything will be okay? That I'll just forgive and forget? No, Amanda. It's time you paid the price for what you've done." I left her like that for hours, letting her stew in her fear and uncertainty. Every now and then, I'd walk into the room just to remind her that I was still there, still in control. She cried, begged, pleaded for me to stop, to let her go, but I remained unmoved. This was her punishment, and I was going to make sure she felt every second of it. When I finally released her, it was well past midnight. She was a wreck, her body trembling, her voice hoarse from screaming. I removed the blindfold and untied her wrists and ankles, watching as she collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. "Now you know what it feels like," I said, my voice cold and emotionless. "Now you know what it's like to be powerless." She didn't respond, just lay there, crying into the pillow. I turned and left the room, leaving her alone in the dark, just as she had left me in the dark about her betrayal. And as I walked out of that cabin, leaving her to her misery, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. She had wanted control, wanted to be the one calling the shots, but now she knew. She was nothing without me, and I was going to make sure she never forgot it. After what happened at the cabin, Amanda was a shell of the woman she used to be. The fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness that followed her wherever she went. She tried to keep up the charade at home, cooking, cleaning, pretending everything was fine. But I could see the fear in her every move, the way she flinched whenever I entered the room, the way her hands trembled when she thought I wasn't looking. But as satisfying as it was to see Amanda broken, it wasn't enough. The man she had betrayed me with, Alex, was still out there, probably living his life without a care in the world, completely oblivious to the havoc he had wreaked in mine. The thought of him walking around, untouched by the consequences of his actions, made my blood boil. Amanda might have been the one who betrayed me, but Alex? He had willingly participated, knowing full well that she was married, that she was mine. He wasn't going to get away with it. I started by doing some digging. Thanks to Amanda's phone, I had his full name, his number, and enough information to find out more about him than he probably realized. It wasn't hard to track him down. A few internet searches, a couple of fake social media profiles, and I had all the details I needed. He was in his mid-30s, worked in some mid-level corporate job, and lived alone in a condo downtown. He seemed like your typical run-of-the-mill guy, nothing special, nothing to suggest he was the type to get involved in an affair with a married woman. But then again, most people aren't what they seem, are they? I started following him, first online and then in real life. I'd watch him go about his day, heading to work, grabbing lunch, hitting the gym, just living his life like he hadn't destroyed someone else's. The more I watched him, the more my hatred for him grew. I wanted to hurt him, to make him suffer the way he had made me suffer. But I couldn't just lash out and risk everything I had. No, I had to be smart about this. I had to be patient. One evening, after I had gathered enough information, I decided it was time to make my move. I knew his routine by heart at this point. He'd leave work around 6, head to the gym for an hour, then grab a drink at a nearby bar before heading home. It was almost laughably predictable, which made my plan all the easier to execute. I chose a night when I knew he'd be alone. No plans with friends, no dates. I followed him to the gym, parked my car in the lot, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, he emerged, looking exhausted but satisfied, probably feeling good about himself after a solid workout. He didn't notice me as he walked to his car, didn't notice the shadow trailing him as he drove to the bar. He had no idea what was coming. I parked a few blocks away, close enough to keep an eye on him but far enough to avoid suspicion. I watched as he walked into the bar, ordered a drink, and settled into a corner booth, scrolling through his phone. Maybe he was texting Amanda, wondering why she hadn't responded to his last message. Or maybe he was just checking sports scores, oblivious to the fact that his life was about to take a very dark turn. I waited until he was on his second drink before I made my move. I walked into the bar, calm and collected, and took a seat at the bar where I could keep an eye on him. He didn't notice me, too engrossed in whatever was on his phone. I ordered a beer, sipped it slowly, and bided my time. The bar was busy enough that I didn't stand out, but not so crowded that I couldn't keep track of him. After about 30 minutes, I made my way over to his booth. He looked up as I approached, his expression one of mild curiosity. He had no idea who I was. Why would he? We had never met, never crossed paths before. But that was about to change. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, my tone friendly, disarming. He hesitated for a second, but then shrugged. "Sure, why not?" I slid into the booth across from him, setting my beer down on the table. For a moment, I just looked at him, taking in the man who had been screwing my wife. The man who had unknowingly turned my life upside down. He looked so ordinary, so unremarkable, that it almost made me laugh. This was the guy who Amanda had thrown everything away for. This was the man who had come between us. "So," I began, my voice casual, "how's your night going?" He looked at me, a little puzzled but not suspicious. "Not bad. Just grabbing a drink after the gym. You?" "Same," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "Needed to unwind a bit after a long day." He nodded, relaxing a little. "Yeah, I know the feeling." We made small talk for a while. Nothing important, just the kind of meaningless conversation you have with a stranger in a bar. But every word that came out of his mouth made me hate him more. I was on the verge of snapping, of reaching across the table and smashing his face in. But I held back. That wasn't part of the plan. I needed to keep my cool, to stick to the script. After a while, he excused himself to go to the restroom. As soon as he was out of sight, I went into action. I pulled out a small vial from my pocket. Colorless. Odorless. Just like the one I had used on Amanda. But this time, the effects would be far more intense. I poured the liquid into his drink, making sure it was fully dissolved, then leaned back in my seat, waiting. When he returned, he didn't suspect a thing. He picked up his drink, took a long sip, and smiled. "So, what do you do for a living?" he asked, continuing the conversation as if nothing had changed. "Oh, you know," I said, forcing a smile. "Just your typical office job. Nothing too exciting. He nodded, not really interested, and took another sip. I watched him closely, waiting for the moment when the drug would start to take effect. It didn't take long. After a few more minutes, I noticed him starting to fidget, his brow furrowing in confusion. "You okay?" I asked, feigning concern. "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied, but his voice was shaky, uncertain. He took another sip of his drink, but this time he barely got it down before his hands started to tremble. He set the glass down, his breathing growing shallow, his face pale. I don't feel so good," he mumbled, his words slurring. "Maybe you had too much to drink," I suggested, my tone light, almost mocking. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear as he realized something was very wrong. He tried to stand up, but his legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed back into the booth, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Help! Help me!" he choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned in close, my voice low and cold. "This is for Amanda," I whispered, letting the words sink in. His eyes widened even further, panic and confusion mixing on his face as he tried to comprehend what was happening. But he didn't have time to piece it all together. The drug was working fast, shutting down his system, making it impossible for him to fight back. I stood up, grabbing my beer and finishing it off in one long gulp. "Good luck, Alex," I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "You're going to need it." With that, I walked out of the bar, leaving him slumped in the booth, gasping for breath, his vision swimming as the drug took full effect. I didn't look back, didn't stop to see if anyone noticed what was happening. I just walked out into the cool night air, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. But I wasn't done yet. No, Alex's suffering was just beginning. I made sure to stay close by, lingering in the shadows as I watched him stumble out of the bar, barely able to walk, his face a mask of panic. He was on his phone, probably trying to call for help, but his words were slurred, incomprehensible. People glanced at him, some with concern, others with disgust, but no one stopped to help. He was just another drunk guy, too far gone to be of any interest to the busy city crowd. He made it to his car, but he was in no state to drive. I watched as he fumbled with his keys, dropping them repeatedly, his hands shaking uncontrollably. By the time he managed to unlock the door, he was a mess. Sweating, panting, barely able to keep his balance. That's when I made my move. I slipped into the car next to him, closing the door quietly behind me. He didn't even notice at first, too focused on trying to get the engine started. But when he finally did, the look of terror on his face was priceless. What are you doing?" he stammered, his voice thick with fear. I leaned in close, my face inches from his. "You should have stayed away from her," I hissed. "You should have kept your hands off my wife." Realization dawned on his face, and he tried to push me away, but he was too weak, too disoriented to do anything. I grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close, and whispered in his ear, "Now you're going to pay for what you've done." I didn't give him a chance to respond. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small syringe I had prepared earlier. He barely had time to react before I jabbed it into his thigh, injecting the contents directly into his bloodstream. He gasped, his body convulsing as the second dose of the drug hit him. His eyes rolled back in his head, his breathing erratic, his limbs twitching uncontrollably. I leaned back, watching as the drug did its work, shutting down his body, rendering him completely helpless. "This is what you get for messing with another man's wife," I said coldly, watching as he struggled to stay conscious. "This is what you deserve." He tried to say something, tried to beg for mercy, but the words wouldn't come. His body was shutting down, his vision fading, his life slipping away with each passing second. And then, just as he was on the verge of losing consciousness, I injected him with the antidote. He gasped, his lungs filling with air as the drug was neutralized, his body jolting back to life. But he was still weak, still helpless, still at my mercy. I leaned in close, my voice a low growl. "This is just the beginning, Alex. You're going to regret the day you ever laid eyes on Amanda." With that, I got out of the car, leaving him there, gasping for breath, his body trembling, his mind reeling from the near-death experience I had just put him through. I walked away, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. He might have survived tonight, but the psychological scars I had left would haunt him forever. Every time he closed his eyes, he'd remember the fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that his life was in someone else's hands. and that someone was me. I wasn't sure what I expected when I walked back into the house after what I did to Alex. Satisfaction? Maybe. A sense of victory? Possibly. But instead, I felt a hollow emptiness that gnawed at me, a void that all the revenge in the world couldn't fill. I had broken Amanda, made her lover suffer, but nothing could erase the betrayal that had shattered the life we'd built together. The house was quiet when I returned, eerily so. It was late, well past midnight, and the only light was the dim glow from the hallway lamp. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock in the living room, but other than that, silence. I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, until I reached the bedroom. Amanda was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of fear and resignation. She didn't ask where I had been, didn't even try to speak. She just watched me, her gaze hollow, like she had nothing left to give. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, crossing my arms as I looked at her. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The weight of everything that had happened hung heavy in the air between us, an invisible barrier that neither of us seemed willing or able to break. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and cold. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me, Amanda?" She flinched at the sound of my voice, but she didn't look away. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I do." "Do you?" I took a step closer, my eyes boring into hers. "Do you really understand what you've done? How you've destroyed everything?" Her lower lip trembled, and she looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously in her lap. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you." "Bullshit," I snapped, my anger flaring up again. "If you didn't want to hurt me, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. You wouldn't have lied to my face, wouldn't have snuck around behind my back like some fucking coward." She winced at the harshness of my words, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she choked out. It just did." "That's your excuse?" I asked, my voice dripping with contempt. "It just happened. You just accidentally fell into bed with another man?" Her tears spilled over, running down her cheeks as she shook her head. "No, that's not what I meant. I was lonely, Jake. I was so lonely, and you were always so busy with work, and I—" "Don't you dare blame this on me!" I cut her off, my voice rising. "Don't you fucking dare! I was working to provide for us, to give us a life, and you repay me by screwing some other guy?" "I'm not blaming you!" she cried, her voice breaking. "I'm not, I swear! It's all my fault, I know that! But I never stopped loving you, Jake! I never stopped!" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. "Love? You call this love? What kind of twisted version of love do you have in your head, Amanda? Because this isn't it. Love isn't lying, cheating, betraying the person you swore to spend your life with." She sobbed, burying her face in her hands as her body shook with the force of her tears. "I know," she whimpered. "I know. And I hate myself for it. I hate myself for what I've done to you." For a moment, I just stood there, watching her cry, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt, betrayed, broken, wanted to lash out, to make her feel every ounce of the pain she had inflicted on me. "Why him?" I asked, my voice cold and detached. "Why Alex?" She sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand as she tried to compose herself. "I don't know," she said weakly. "He was just there. He paid attention to me, made me feel special when I was feeling invisible. But it was a mistake, Jake. A horrible, awful mistake. And I wish I could take it back. But you can't, can you?" I said, taking another step closer. "You can't undo what you've done. You can't erase the fact that you've ruined everything." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling over as she whispered, "I know." There was a long silence between us, the weight of our broken marriage hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. I could see the desperation in her eyes, The way she was clinging to the last shreds of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this, that I could find it in myself to forgive her. But I couldn't. Not after everything that had happened. "I saw him tonight," I said suddenly, my voice calm, almost conversational. She froze, her eyes widening in shock. "What?" she whispered. "Alex," I clarified, my tone steady. "I saw him tonight. Had a little chat with him, actually." Her face went pale, and she stared at me in disbelief. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing permanent," I said with a shrug. "Just gave him a little taste of what it feels like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy, the same way I was when I found out about you two." "Oh my God," she breathed, covering her mouth with her hand. "Jake, what did you do?" "Don't worry," I said, my voice cold. "He's fine. Physically, at least. But he won't be forgetting tonight anytime soon. And neither will you." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "You're scaring me, Jake." "Good," I replied, my eyes locking onto hers. "You should be scared. You should be terrified of what you've done, of what you've turned me into. Because I'm not the same man you married, Amanda. You killed that man the moment you decided to cheat on me." She broke down completely at that, her sobs echoing through the room as she crumpled onto the bed, burying her face in the pillows. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but cold detachment. I had wanted her to suffer, and now she was. But instead of feeling satisfaction, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of loss. This was the woman I had once loved, the woman I had planned to spend my life with, and now she was nothing more than a stranger to me. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke again, my voice hollow. "It's over, Amanda. Whatever we had, whatever we were, it's over." She lifted her head, her tear-streaked face filled with despair. "Jake, please," she begged, her voice raw. "Don't say that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, Counseling," I interrupted, shaking my head in disbelief. "You really think counseling is going to fix this? After everything you've done? There's nothing left to fix, Amanda. You destroyed us." She choked on a sob, her hands trembling as she reached out to me. "Please, Jake, I'm begging you, don't leave me. I'll do anything, I swear. Just give me another chance." I stared at her, my heart aching with the weight of her words. Part of me wanted to give in, to take her in my arms and tell her that we'd find a way through this, that we'd be okay. But the other part, the part that had been scarred by her betrayal, knew that it was impossible. There was no going back to what we were. Not after this. "I can't do this anymore, Amanda," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay strong. "I can't keep pretending that we can just go back to the way things were. Because we can't. You killed that future the moment you decided to cheat." She shook her head, her tears falling faster. "No, Jake, please, don't do this. I love you so much." "Love?" I repeated bitterly. "You call this love? If this is love, then I want nothing to do with it." She sobbed, her body shaking as she tried to hold herself together. "Please," she whispered, her voice broken. "Please don't leave me." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath as I tried to steady myself. "I already have, Amanda," I said quietly. "I left the moment I found out you were with him." Her sobs grew louder, more desperate, but I couldn't stay and listen to it anymore. I turned and walked out of the bedroom, my heart heavy with the finality of what had just happened. As I stepped into the hallway, I could still hear her crying, her voice muffled by the distance between us. It would have been so easy to turn back, to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But I knew it would be a lie, and I was done with lies. I walked out of the house, leaving her behind in the darkness. The days following that final conversation with Amanda were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My mind was consumed with the wreckage of what my life had become. The house felt suffocating, every corner haunted by memories of a marriage that no longer existed. I didn't return to the bedroom. I couldn't bear to see Amanda, to hear her sobs, or to feel her presence lingering in the place we had once called home. Instead, I spent my nights on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Despite everything, I hadn't made a decision about the future. Divorce was the obvious solution, the clean break that would sever the ties between us for good. But there was a part of me, small and shrinking by the day, that hesitated. It wasn't about love. That had been shattered beyond repair. It was about the years we had spent together, the life we had built, and the idea of throwing it all away. But I knew deep down that clinging to the past would only prolong the pain. One morning, as the sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the living room, I made the decision that I had been avoiding. It was time to end this, to put an end to the suffering for both of us. I needed to speak to a lawyer, to take the first steps toward officially closing the chapter on this marriage. The thought of it made my stomach turn, but it was necessary. We couldn't continue like this, living in a house filled with ghosts and lies. I found a reputable divorce attorney in town, someone with a strong track record and a reputation for handling tough cases. The idea of going through a bitter, drawn-out battle in court wasn't appealing, but I was prepared for it. Amanda was many things: hysterical, manipulative, deceitful. But she wasn't stupid. I knew she'd fight me tooth and nail, try to squeeze every last drop out of the life we had built together. But I was ready for that. I was ready for anything. I made the call to the attorney's office, my hands trembling slightly as I held the phone. The receptionist answered in a calm, professional tone, and within minutes I had an appointment scheduled for the following week. As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of relief washed over me. This was it, the beginning of the end. The days leading up to the meeting with the lawyer were tense. Amanda and I barely spoke, existing like two strangers sharing the same space. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, the tension palpable. I could tell she knew something was coming, but she didn't ask. Maybe she was too afraid to hear the answer, too scared to face the reality of what our marriage had become. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, I left the house early, not even bothering to tell Amanda where I was going. She watched me leave, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. But she didn't say a word. I could feel her gaze on my back as I walked out the door. But I didn't look back. The attorney's office was a sleek, modern space in the heart of downtown, all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside me. I was greeted by a young woman with a bright smile, who led me to a small conference room where the lawyer would meet me. As I sat down at the table, my mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts tumbling over one another in a chaotic mess. The lawyer, Mr. Harrington, entered a few minutes later, a tall, silver-haired man with sharp features and an air of quiet confidence. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and sat down across from me, his piercing blue eyes studying me carefully. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I understand this must be a difficult time for you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. He seemed to sense my hesitation and continued. "I've reviewed the information you provided over the phone," he said, flipping through a file on the table. "It's clear that the situation is deeply personal and complex, but I'm here to guide you through it, to ensure that your rights are protected, and that we reach the best possible outcome." I appreciated his straightforward approach, but the reality of what we were discussing hit me like a ton of bricks. This was it. The end of my marriage. The end of everything I had known for so many years. "I want a divorce," I said finally, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "There's no saving this. It's over." Mr. Harrington nodded, as if he had expected this. "I understand. Given the circumstances, it's probably the best course of action. We'll need to discuss the division of assets, any potential spousal support, and of course the legal process itself. But first I need to know, are you prepared for what this might entail? Divorce can be a long, emotionally draining process, especially when there are deep wounds involved." "I'm prepared," I said, my voice firm. "I've been living in hell for months now. I just want it to be over." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. We'll start by filing the necessary paperwork to initiate the divorce proceedings. You'll need to gather any financial documents, bank statements, property deeds, anything that outlines the assets you and your wife share. We'll also need to discuss any evidence you have of her infidelity. While it may not affect the division of assets, it could be relevant in other aspects of the case." I thought back to the mountain of evidence I had collected. The texts, the emails, the hotel reservations. I had more than enough to prove Amanda's betrayal, but the thought of dragging all that out in court made me sick to my stomach. But it was a necessary evil, a step I had to take to protect myself. I have plenty of evidence, I said, my voice steady. I'll get everything to you as soon as possible. Good, Mr. Harrington said, making a note in the file. I'll handle the legal aspects, but I want to stress the importance of self-care during this process. Divorce can take a heavy toll on your mental and emotional health. Surround yourself with supportive people, and consider speaking to a therapist if you haven't already. You don't have to go through this alone. I nodded, appreciating his concern, but I wasn't sure how much self-care could help at this point. The damage had been done, and I was barely holding myself together. But I wasn't about to let Amanda win. She had taken enough from me already. After the meeting, I left the attorney's office with a stack of papers and a sense of finality. The process had begun, and there was no turning back now. I drove home in silence, the weight of what I had just set in motion pressing down on me like a lead blanket. When I walked through the door, Amanda was waiting for me in the living room. She looked pale, her eyes hollow, as if she had been crying again. She didn't say anything as I entered, just watched me with a mixture of fear and despair. I tossed my keys on the table and met her gaze, my expression unreadable. I saw a lawyer today, I said bluntly. I'm filing for divorce. Her face crumpled, and she let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hand. Jake, no, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please don't do this. We can still fix this. There's nothing left to fix, I interrupted, my voice hard. This marriage is over, Amanda. You ended it the moment you decided to cheat on me. She shook her head, her tears flowing freely now. Please, Jake. I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll move out if you want. It's too late for that, I said coldly. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your promises. I want out. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking with the force of her despair. I watched her, my heart a twisted knot of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. This was it, the end of the line. I'll be staying with a friend for a while, I said, my voice detached. You can have the house for now. We'll sort out the rest later. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her eyes pleading. Jake, please, don't leave me. I can't do this without you. I'm not leaving you, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. You left me a long time ago. With that, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her alone with the reality of what she had done. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight that had been crushing me was starting to lift, and as I walked to my car, I knew that I was finally taking control of my life again. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but it was a road I was ready to walk. Alone, but free. Leaving Amanda behind was like stepping out of a dark tunnel and into the light. The weight that had been crushing me for so long was finally lifting, and I could breathe again. But as liberating as it was to walk away from the wreckage of our marriage, it also left me feeling hollow. My life had been turned upside down, and I was left to pick up the pieces, to figure out who I was without her. I stayed with a friend for the first few weeks after leaving the house. He had been through a divorce himself a few years back, so he understood what I was going through. His support was invaluable, giving me a place to stay and a shoulder to lean on when I needed it. But as much as I appreciated his help, I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to find my own place, my own space where I could start rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy at first. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of the life I had lost, the future that had been ripped away from me. Simple things, like passing by a restaurant where Amanda and I used to have dinner, or hearing a song that we once danced to, would bring the pain crashing back, making it hard to move forward. But I was determined not to let it break me. I had survived the worst of it, and now it was time to start living again. Finding an apartment wasn't difficult, but making it feel like home was another story. The place was small, nothing like the house Amanda and I had shared, but it was mine. I took my time decorating, choosing furniture and decor that suited me. things that reflected who I was now, not who I had been with her. It was a slow process, but each small step helped me reclaim a bit of the identity I had lost. Work became my refuge during this time. Throwing myself into my job was a way to keep my mind off the divorce, off the emptiness that sometimes threatened to swallow me whole. I took on extra projects, stayed late at the office, anything to keep busy. My coworkers noticed the change in me, but they didn't push. They knew I was going through something, and they gave me the space I needed. As the weeks turned into months, I slowly started to rebuild. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. It was strange at first, slipping back into old friendships after so much had changed, but it was also comforting. These were people who knew me before everything went to hell, and being around them reminded me that there was still life to be lived, still happiness to be found. One of the hardest parts of starting over was facing the loneliness. Amanda had been a constant presence in my life for so long that being alone felt foreign, like something I had to relearn. There were nights when the silence in my apartment was deafening, when the emptiness of the bed beside me was a stark reminder of what I had lost. But I knew that this was part of the process, part of healing. I had to learn to be okay with being alone, to find comfort in my own company. Therapy became a crucial part of my journey to healing. I had been hesitant at first, not wanting to relive the pain, not wanting to open up about the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. But I knew that if I didn't deal with it, it would continue to haunt me. So I found a therapist, someone who specialized in helping people navigate the aftermath of infidelity, and I started to talk. The sessions were tough, dredging up emotions I had buried deep inside, but they were also cathartic. For the first time, I was able to express the anger, the sadness, and the confusion that had been eating away at me. My therapist helped me see that while the pain was real and valid, it didn't have to define me. I could take control of my narrative, of my future, and find a way to move forward. One of the biggest lessons I learned through therapy was forgiveness. Not just of Amanda, but of myself. I had been carrying around a lot of guilt, questioning what I could have done differently, how I could have prevented the betrayal. But my therapist helped me see that it wasn't my fault, that Amanda's choices were hers alone, and that I couldn't keep punishing myself for something I had no control over. Letting go of that guilt was a huge step in my healing process, allowing me to start forgiving myself and, eventually, to forgive her. Forgiving Amanda didn't mean forgetting what she had done or reconciling with her. It didn't mean that I had to let her back into my life. It simply meant that I was no longer going to let her actions control my emotions, my happiness, or my future. I was letting go of the anger, the resentment, and the pain, not for her sake, but for mine. Once I reached that point, everything started to change. The heaviness that had been weighing me down began to lift, and I found myself starting to enjoy life again. I took up old hobbies that I had abandoned during my marriage: hiking, photography, cooking, things that brought me joy and reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart. I even started traveling again, something Amanda and I had done often before things went wrong. But this time, I traveled alone, exploring new places, meeting new people, and rediscovering the world on my own terms. It was during one of these trips that I met someone new. Her name was Emily, and we crossed paths in a small coastal town where I had rented a cottage for a week. She was different from Amanda in every way, kind, warm, and genuine. There was no pretense, no games, just an easy connection that took me by surprise. We spent time together, exploring the town, sharing meals, and talking late into the night. It was the first time since the divorce that I felt something real, something that had the potential to be more. But I was cautious. I didn't want to rush into anything, didn't want to make the same mistakes I had made before. Emily seemed to understand, never pushing, just letting things unfold naturally. We stayed in touch after the trip, and over the next few months, what started as a friendship slowly grew into something deeper. She became a light in the darkness, someone who made me believe that it was possible to find happiness again, to love again, even after everything I had been through. Our relationship was different from what I had with Amanda. There was no rush, no pressure to move too fast. We took our time, getting to know each other, building something solid and real. Emily understood the scars I carried, the wounds that hadn't fully healed, and she was patient, never pushing me beyond what I was ready for. As time went on, I realized that I was ready to let her in, ready to open my heart again. It was a scary thought, but also exciting. With Emily, there was no baggage, no history of pain and betrayal. There was only the future, bright and full of possibilities. Looking back, I could see how far I had come since the day I discovered Amanda's betrayal. I had walked through fire, been burned, but I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The pain had changed me, but it hadn't destroyed me. It had forced me to confront my deepest fears, to face the reality of who I was and what I wanted in life. In the end, the experience taught me that life goes on, even after the worst of betrayals. The sun still rises, new opportunities still come, and happiness is still possible. I learned that I was stronger than I ever imagined, that I could survive the unimaginable and come out the other side a better person. Emily and I eventually moved in together, building a life that was simple, honest, and full of love. She became my partner in every sense of the word, someone I could trust, someone who made me want to be the best version of myself. We traveled, explored, and created new memories, untainted by the past. Amanda, on the other hand, became a distant memory, a chapter of my life that had closed. The divorce was finalized without much drama. She had been too broken, too defeated to fight. We parted ways quietly, with no fanfare, just a mutual understanding that our time together was over. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't feel much of anything for her at all. She was a part of my past, but she no longer had any power over me. As for Alex, I never heard from him again. After our encounter, he seemed to vanish from my life completely. I didn't care what happened to him. I was too focused on my own future to worry about his. Whatever he did, wherever he ended up, it didn't matter to me. He was just another ghost, another reminder of a life I had left behind. In the end, I learned that the key to moving on wasn't about revenge or anger or even closure. It was about acceptance, accepting what had happened, accepting that I couldn't change the past, and accepting that I had the power to shape my own future. It was about letting go of the things that no longer served me and embracing the new possibilities that life had to offer. And that's exactly what I did. I embraced the new life I had built, the new love I had found, and the new man I had become. I wasn't the same person I was before the betrayal, but that was okay. I was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future held. Because in the end, life goes on. And so did I.